Sometimes it's not the present that hurts you. It only pretends to. A tone of voice, a silence, a look that lingers half a second too long. And suddenly, something inside you collapses like an old house remembering fire. You don't react as an adult. You return, not consciously, but completely. And if you listen closely, beneath the moment, you can feel it, the echo of a younger you, still waiting to be understood. You call it overreaction. Others call it too sensitive. But what if it's neither? What if every trigger is a thread, pulling you back through time, not to punish you, but to show you where your story paused? You, empath, don't just feel the present. You feel the unfinished past, still asking for a voice. There are moments when someone withdraws, and it hits you deeper than it should. Not because of them, but because once silence meant something else. Distance meant danger. Withdrawal meant loss. Your body remembers even when your mind tries to stay composed. And in that silence, a child inside you whispers, "Did I do something wrong?" It's never really about the small thing, the unanswered message, the slight change in tone, the subtle shift in energy. For others, it passes like wind. For you, it lands like truth, because somewhere long ago, small things were clues, signals you had to read to feel safe. You learned to notice everything, and now you cannot unsee it. Carl Jung once spoke of the shadow, not as something dark, but as something hidden. And what is a trigger, if not a mirror briefly revealing what was pushed away? You don't just feel pain, you encounter fragments of yourself that were never allowed to exist fully. And each reaction is not weakness, but a return of something real. Your mind may say, "This is nothing," but your chest tightens, your breath changes, your hands feel it before your thoughts do, because the body doesn't live in time the way the mind does. For the body, everything unresolved is still happening. And every trigger is not just a memory, it's a re-experience. You think you're reacting to the present person, but often you're speaking to someone who isn't there anymore. You're answering old questions, seeking old safety, protecting old wounds. And the strange part? The person in front of you may never understand the depth of what just moved through you. What if your triggers are not your enemy? What if they are precise, almost sacred signals, showing you exactly where your healing lies? Not in theory, not in logic, but in those moments when you feel most exposed. You, empath, are not breaking. You are being shown where you are still open. As a child, you didn't have a choice. You adapted. You absorbed. You survived. But now, there is a small, almost invisible space between the trigger and your response. And inside that space, something new can exist. Not suppression, not denial, but awareness. The kind that gently says, "This is old, but I am here now." Healing doesn't mean you stop being triggered. It means you stop abandoning yourself when it happens. You stay. You listen. You recognize the younger voice without letting it take over your entire world. And slowly, those doors from the past don't disappear, but they no longer pull you inside without your permission. And maybe this is the quiet truth no one tells you. You were never meant to outgrow that child, only to meet them again with the awareness you didn't have back then. Not to silence them, but to finally understand what they were trying to say all along. Because every trigger is not just a wound. It is an invitation to come home to yourself. You notice it in the way your mood shifts without warning. One moment you are steady, grounded, and the next, something inside you trembles, as if the ground itself has memory. It isn't weakness, it's recognition. Something familiar has entered the room, even if no one else can see it. There are faces you meet that feel strangely powerful over you, not because of who they are, but because of who they resemble in your inner world. A tone, a gesture, a certain emotional distance, and suddenly, you are not standing as yourself anymore. You are smaller, quieter, waiting, watching, trying to read what comes next. And isn't it curious how quickly you take responsibility for what you feel? As if every shift in someone's energy must somehow be yours to fix. That didn't begin today. That began when your safety depended on understanding others more than yourself. You learned early that harmony had a price. and often you paid it with your own voice. Sometimes the trigger comes as pressure, an expectation you didn't agree to, yet feel unable to refuse. Your chest tightens, not from the demand itself, but from something older, the memory of not being allowed to say no without consequence. So you comply, not because you want to, but because a part of you still believes resistance leads to loss. There are moments when you feel unseen, even when someone is right in front of you, and the feeling cuts deeper than it should. It lingers, expands, because once, being unseen wasn't just uncomfortable, it meant being emotionally alone in a way that shaped you. Now, even a small echo of that feeling can open something vast. You may find yourself over-explaining your emotions, trying to make them understandable, acceptable, safe, as if clarity could protect you from rejection. But this, too, is an old pattern, the need to translate your inner world so others won't turn away from it. And still, part of you wonders if you are too much or not enough. There is also the quiet trigger of unpredictability. When someone's mood shifts even slightly, you feel it instantly. Your body prepares, adjusts, braces, because once, unpredictability meant you had to stay alert. You learn to read between words, between breaths, between silences. And now that awareness never fully turns off. And then there is closeness itself. Strange, isn't it? How the very thing you long for can also unsettle you. When someone gets too close, too real, too present, something inside hesitates. Not because you don't want it, but because closeness once came with confusion, with mixed signals, with emotions you couldn't safely navigate. You might notice how deeply you react to disappointment, not just your own, but others. A subtle sigh, a slight withdrawal, and it feels heavier than it should. Because once, disappointment carried weight. It shaped how you saw yourself. And now, even a small reflection of it can awaken that old question, am I enough? But beneath all of this, there is something quietly changing. A new awareness, almost like a soft light entering old rooms. You begin to notice the moment before you disappear into the reaction. The second before the past takes over. And in that second, something powerful happens. You remember that you are no longer there. And maybe this is where everything begins to shift. Not by erasing the triggers, not by forcing yourself to be unaffected, but by staying present when they arise. By seeing them not as proof that something is wrong with you, but as messages from a time when you had fewer choices. Because now you do have a choice. Not always an easy one, not always a clear one, but a real one. To feel without dissolving, to remember without reliving, to stand in the present, even while the past gently reaches for you. And the more you do this, the less those old doors pull you in. They still exist. They may always exist. But you are no longer a child standing in front of them, unsure whether to enter. You are the one holding the key now. There are moments when you feel an urgency to fix everything, even what was never yours to carry. Someone is upset, and before they even speak, you are already searching for the solution, the right words, the perfect tone. Not because you were asked, but because once peace depended on how quickly you could restore it. And then comes guilt, quiet, persistent, almost invisible. It appears when you choose yourself, when you step back, when you don't respond the way you used to, and it feels disproportionate, doesn't it? As if you've broken an unspoken rule. Because somewhere in your past, your needs were negotiable, but others' emotions were not. You may also notice how praise can feel uncomfortable. Not because you don't want it, but because it doesn't always land. It floats near you but doesn't sink in. As if a part of you is still waiting for the but that used to follow. The correction, the condition, the reminder that love had to be earned. There are days when exhaustion isn't physical, it's emotional time travel. You've been responding not just to today, but to echoes layered beneath it. Every interaction carrying more weight than it seems. And you wonder why you feel so drained when all you did was exist among people. Sometimes the trigger is being misunderstood. A simple misinterpretation can feel like something much deeper. Not just a momentary confusion, but a kind of erasure. Because once not being understood meant not being seen at all. And so you try harder. Explain more. Adjust yourself, hoping this time it will land. You might also feel a strange pull toward familiar emotional patterns, even when they hurt. Not because you want pain, but because familiarity feels like truth. The nervous system recognizes what it has known before, even if it wasn't safe. And so, part of you leans toward what feels known, even as another part longs for something different. There are times when you silence yourself before anyone else can. You edit your thoughts, soften your words, reshape your feelings. Not out of dishonesty, but out of protection. Because once, being fully expressed may have led to conflict, rejection, or withdrawal. So now you preemptively become smaller. And yet, anger can surface too, quiet, controlled, sometimes barely noticeable. Not explosive, but dense. It sits beneath the surface, waiting. Because anger, for you, may not have been welcome. It may have been something you had to hide, redirect, or transform into something more acceptable. But it never disappeared. It only changed form. There is also the trigger of being needed too much. When someone leans on you heavily, something inside both responds and resists. You want to help, but you also feel the weight of it. Because once, being needed may have meant losing yourself, becoming the support without having any of your own. And then, unexpectedly, comes the longing. A quiet ache for something you can't fully name. Not tied to a specific moment, but to a feeling that never fully arrived. Safety without conditions. Closeness without confusion. Understanding without effort. It lives in you not as memory, but as absence. But here is what begins to change slowly, almost imperceptibly. You start to recognize these patterns not as who you are, but as what you learned. You begin to separate your essence from your adaptations. And in that separation, something softer emerges. Something more true. You begin to respond differently, not perfectly, not always, but consciously. You pause. You notice. You question the intensity of what you feel, not to invalidate it, but to understand where it's coming from. And in doing so, you create space where there used to be only reaction. And over time, that space becomes something sacred. A place where the past is acknowledged, but not obeyed. Where the child within you is heard, but not left alone to navigate everything. Where you, as you are now, begin to lead. Because the truth is, those triggers were never meant to trap you. They were meant to guide you back to the parts of yourself that were shaped in silence. And now you are no longer silent. There are moments when you feel the urge to disappear, not physically, but emotionally. To step back, to dim your presence, to become less visible in the space you occupy. It happens so quickly you barely notice it forming. But if you look closely, it's not about the present moment at all. It's about a time when being fully seen did not feel safe. And sometimes, it's the opposite. A sudden need to be acknowledged, to be reassured, to feel that you matter in a way that settles something deep inside. Not out of insecurity, but from an old emptiness that still echoes. A place where recognition was inconsistent. And so now, even a small absence can feel like a return to that void. You may find yourself drawn into emotional roles without realizing it. The listener, the healer, the one who understands without being understood. Feels natural, almost automatic. But this role didn't begin as a choice. It began as a way to stay connected, to stay needed, to stay close to what felt like love. There are also moments when conflict feels larger than it is. A disagreement becomes something more, something heavier, almost threatening. Not because of what's being said, but because your system remembers when conflict didn't feel safe, didn't feel contained, didn't feel resolvable. And so, even now, a part of you braces for something that may never come. You might notice how hard it is to trust calm. When things are steady, when nothing is wrong, when there is no tension to manage, something inside becomes restless. As if peace itself is unfamiliar territory. Because once, calm may have been temporary, a quiet before something shifted. And then there's the quiet fear of being too much, too emotional, too aware, too affected by things others seem to move through easily. That thought doesn't arrive on its own, it was planted, gently or not, over time. And now it surfaces in moments when you are simply being yourself. You may also feel a deep sensitivity to rejection, even in its softest forms. a delayed reply, a canceled plan, a subtle change in tone. It touches something deeper than logic can explain. Because once, connection may have felt uncertain, something that could be withdrawn without warning. There are times when you give more than you have and only realize it afterward. Not because you don't know your limits, but because something in you still equates giving with belonging. As if your place in someone's life must be earned again and again through how much you offer. And yet, when you begin to pull back, when you choose balance instead of overextension, there is a strange discomfort, as if you are stepping outside of a role that once defined you. It feels unfamiliar, almost wrong, but also quietly right. You start to notice patterns that once felt invisible. The way certain people evoke certain versions of you. The way specific situations awaken specific emotions. And slowly, you begin to see the map of your inner world, not as chaos, but as memory. There comes a moment, subtle but undeniable, when you pause in the middle of a trigger and realize, this isn't all mine. The intensity, the urgency, the depth of the reaction, it carries something older. And in that realization, you are no longer fully inside it. You are also observing it. And that observation changes everything. Because now, when the feeling rises, you don't immediately follow it. You stay with it. You let it move through you without becoming it. You begin to separate the past from the present, not by force, but by awareness. You start to speak to yourself differently. Not with judgment, not with impatience, but with a kind of quiet understanding. As if you are meeting yourself where you once stood alone. And in that meeting, something begins to soften. The triggers don't vanish, but they lose their power to define you. They become signals instead of storms, invitations instead of invasions. And you, slowly, become someone who can feel deeply without being pulled away from yourself. And then, almost without noticing when it happened, you realize something profound. You are no longer trying to escape your past. You are no longer trying to silence it. You are no longer trying to become someone untouched by it. You are integrating it. The child within you is no longer hidden behind reactions. They are no longer speaking only through pain. They are being heard directly, gently, consciously. And in that connection, something new is born. Not a different version of you, but a more complete one. You begin to feel a quiet stability, not because nothing affects you, but because you remain with yourself when it does. You trust your experience without being consumed by it. You respond instead of reliving. And maybe this is what it truly means to heal, not to erase the sensitivity, not to become less affected, but to become more present. To feel without losing yourself. To remember without returning. To carry your past without letting it carry you. And in the end, you see it clearly. Every trigger that once pulled you backward was also pointing you inward, not to trap you in who you were, but to guide you toward who you are becoming. And now, when the old echoes rise, you don't disappear into them. You listen, you understand, and you stay. If something in this story felt familiar, you're not alone. Sometimes just naming it is already a step toward healing. Share in the comments what resonated with you, or what you've started noticing within yourself. And if you want to keep exploring these quiet inner patterns together, you're welcome to stay and subscribe. Thank you for watching.